Well, the Trump administration is fighting with China over who started the COVID pandemic. And I don't understand it because both countries are talking all kinds of nonsense, fighting in public. Some things are true, some things are not. China apparently loves Democrats and Dr. Fauci and says Trump did everything wrong. Trump is saying, no, it's China. I just want to invite you to figure this out for me because I have no grand narrative. I can see the holes in both arguments. And I'm wondering, why is this happening? And why now in the year 2025? So last week, the Trump administration launched this website blaming Wuhan for the COVID lab leak. And it reads very much like an I told you so from President Trump. In response, China published this white paper suggesting that the COVID pandemic could have come from the United States. Now, we've been over this. There is evidence that the COVID pandemic could have leaked from U.S. labs that were doing gain of function under Dr. Anthony Fauci. Now, the media says, yes, Fauci did gain of function in China, but Fauci also did gain of function in the United States. I can prove that to you. So what's with these weird political fighting in public over the pandemic? Now, remember this strange evidence we showed you 3 years ago that in March of 2020, researchers at Boston University published research showing that they had manipulated a spike protein from Omicron, which we didn't know about until 2021, and that the strain was 80% deadly in mice. Again, that was gain of function in Boston around a coronavirus virus. And it happened in early 2020, meaning they had been working on it throughout 2019. So there was gain of function that happened in the United States. And we also know there was an outbreak at Fort-Detrick-Labor. When people started to question that, recall this, the CDC said, anyone questioning that is QAnon. You can say the COVID came from a Chinese lab, that's acceptable, but you cannot say that COVID was being manipulated in the United States while there was a leak. That's QAnon. But there are biolabs in Maryland, and it turned out that Fort Detrick did have a lab leak. In August of 2019, we showed you this.
And it was, by the way, one of the most underreported aspects of this story, that the fact that it's not a conspiracy, it's a fact.
And it is an NIH lab, meaning it was a Fauci-run lab, and it was closed for 8 months in the summer of 2019, which the CDC did investigate. Now, just before this breach, researchers from this lab were working on research about coronavirus. Look at this paper published in March of 2019. The lab was closed after this research was done. Here's a graphic from that paper, again in 2019, showing how COVID could spill over to humans from animals. So, and then again, in that same summer, we're talking summer 2019, there was an outbreak of a respiratory virus in Virginia, about 60 miles from the lab. And here's a doctor at the time on ABC News saying, so weird, we're getting a respiratory virus in the middle of summer, an outbreak. I don't know what this is about. Watch.
Yeah. 60 miles.
Tonight, a deadly outbreak in Virginia. 2 deaths and dozens of residents sickened by a respiratory illness here at the Green Spring Retirement Community.
For a respiratory outbreak to occur in July would certainly not be as likely as for it to occur during the winter.
Okay, so did this outbreak end, or did it spread throughout the United States? Was it COVID, or was it another respiratory virus in the middle of summer? Now, what China is saying is this is not QAnon. There is smoke here, and the United States never did a proper investigation. And that's true. China says that, but here's the thing. China's refuting that they had any kind of zoological outbreak. They're saying, no, wasn't possible. They say they tested over 80,000 species of wildlife. I don't know if that's true. What I'm saying is that both countries have suspicious things happening. Both are fighting. I don't believe either of them. And so I don't know what to believe because there's such strange things. They're saying they did actually find COVID in some frozen food products in 2020. In 2020, they're saying that the likelihood that COVID outbreak came from these different things, they're labeling this like direct zoonotic spillover, possible to likely. Introduction through an intermediate host. Okay, likely to very likely. Through the food chain, possible. But through a lab leak, they're saying extremely unlikely. Now, here's where they start swinging at the United States, saying we need to check ourselves before we go pointing the finger. They're saying the U.S. had a slow and ineffective response during the early stage of the outbreak. And it was basically the worst of all countries. That it was totally our fault and we were the worst. And when we're doing it again, basically, they're saying that now that we have bird flu in 2024, that we didn't take responsibility. We didn't internationally, put everyone on notice. And then we cut off the WHO. And then they go straight for Trump. And the Republicans, they're saying that one American economist said that the U.S. President Trump at the time, and his team downplayed the crisis and ignored health guidelines and urged the U.S. government to examine all possible data and call out misinformation. Then they say that Trump goes on to downplay the pandemic, and he left certain populations vulnerable, like ethnic minorities and the elderly, and that the U.S. didn't do the right thing until Democrats took office in 2021, when Republicans started to call about misinformation and vaccine misinformation and all of that. So China loved the Democratic response to the COVID pandemic. They think Trump did it shit, and that the Democrats came in and did it right. And then they hit us for having less than 70% vaccination rate. They claim that the U.S. is scapegoating China for all of the pandemic failures. They're saying it's, they called it we called it the Chinese virus, that this has been negatively affecting Asian Americans, and that the United States didn't do its job. And then when there were reports of outbreaks inside the United States, that the United States hid that, which seems to be true. We do not get an answer about these gain-of-function projects in early 2020 or the outbreaks in 2019. We have never got real answers about that. So the report also says that the U.S. makes a scapegoat out of Dr. Fauci. Why does China love Dr. Fauci? Do they not know that he did gain-of-function here too? I mean, they put it in their report that the United States had. In fact, there's several things that are true in this report about outbreaks and gain of function that happened in 2020 and before. They must know Dr. Fauci greenlit those. So why do they think he's the hero? It just doesn't make sense. Now, this week, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said they are investigating Fauci's role in funding gain of function in Wuhan. But he did it here too. It happened here too. So I'm just curious why we're pretending that didn't happen. So what do you make of this? All of the inconsistencies. China's not telling the full truth. The Trump administration's not telling the full truth. Why are they warring like this for the international narrative when both of them seem wrong? I don't understand it. Tell me what you think the purpose of this happening now and why it seems so critical to point the finger to the other.
Because it's control, to me anyway, it seems like it's control of the COVID narrative, and it's about public trust.
Yeah.
So at a time when China, and right now China's on real tenuous ground.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping, you actually have like university students now holding protests against Xi Jinping in China. You don't have that. You don't really have those types of things. So it's control over this public trust narrative. And so President Trump, as he, moves in towards 2026 midterm elections, right now, trying to shore up that public trust to say that we've got your back. We can, it wasn't us, it was them.
Right.
But there's so many inconsistencies here with the biolabs. Also,
but it very well could have been us, and it wasn't Trump. It was Fauci, right?
Right. And but it's also the control of the biolab question, because these biolabs are still operating,
yes.
by the way.
Yes.
Tulsi Gabbard just today, speaking with Megyn Kelly, talked about these biolabs, talked about Dr. Fauci, going after him.
In China, though, she did not address the ones that are here.
Yes, and the ones we have in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So, again, it's sort of like, look over here, but not over here. Like, we don't want to tell you the real full story of this.
Yeah.
Well, and like I said, I feel like the reason they won't release the files for Epstein and the JFK files is because once people realize they've been lying for all this time about all of this stuff, it opens people's minds to the fact that maybe they're lying about other things, and they can't have that. They can't have a bunch of awakened people, because we start questioning everything then, and then their propaganda doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then and then everything is like under a deep state narrative, right?
Right.
All of the things, it would confirm all the conspiracy nuts out there, people like us who are calling this out. Oh, Fort-Detrick has this secret bioweapon and then 60 miles away.
And it was closed for a lab leak that was working on COVID. That's kind of weird,
And all
right?
these old people get this mysterious respiratory virus.
And I feel strange, presenting this story to you because I can't point out who's the bad guy. They're both lying. And so I can't figure out the narrative of like, why give these half stories and these true, half narratives, these incomplete narratives. I can't make heads or tails of it. So let me know what you think. I mean, we don't have answers. We have more questions than anything else we continue to have from the pandemic.